In 2016, a shocking murder took place in the peaceful town of Fort Worth, Texas. The victim was a young mother and paramedic, Elizabeth Arellano. The crime was so brutal that it stunned even seasoned investigators. Initially, the police thought Elizabeth might have taken her own life, but eyewitness accounts didn't support this theory. Despite the horrific nature of the crime, many felt the perpetrator's sentence was too light. Elizabeth was born on August 16, 1987 in Fort Worth, where she spent her entire life. She was very close to her two sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna. After her biological father left when she was young, her mother Juanita remarried a man named Fidel. Fidel adopted Elizabeth and her sisters and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a great relationship with her stepfather, who was always there for her. She was a diligent student who dreamed of becoming a doctor. In high school, she started dating a man named Rudolph Arellano, who was 8 years her senior. Despite their initial concerns due to the age difference, Elizabeth's parents accepted their relationship as they found Rudolph to be serious and reliable. Elizabeth got married at 16 right after school, and she and her husband had 4 kids. But she didn't want to just be a mom. She remembered her dream of becoming a doctor, so she went to medical school and started working as a paramedic, with plans to further her education. Elizabeth was a kind and religious woman, raising her kids with Christian values. She was known for her readiness to help others. Her marriage to Rudolph seemed happy, but after 13 years, things started to fall apart. Rudolph was controlling and his jealousy became too much. In 2016, Elizabeth moved out with the kids after a big fight. Rudolph tried to make amends, but Elizabeth was done. She didn't want her kids to witness their fights anymore, so she filed for divorce. A few days later, Elizabeth disappeared. She had been in good spirits, trying to distract herself from the divorce by going out with friends. On the night of April 15, 2016, she went to a club, had fun, but didn't drink because she drove herself. She got home late, called a friend to say she was safe, but never went inside her house. The next morning, her mom, Juanita, was worried when she found out Elizabeth wasn't home. Her car was outside, unlocked, with the keys in the ignition and her purse and phone inside. Juanita knew something was wrong and called the police. The police started investigating, interviewing her friends and tracing her movements that night. They found calls and messages from Rudolph on her phone, but Elizabeth never responded. Cops showed up at Rudolph's place to check out his whereabouts and activities from the night before. He said he'd talked to his ex-wife, who promised to bring the kids over for the weekend, but then she stopped picking up her phone. He thought she might have changed her mind. As for his alibi, it was a bit shaky. He claimed he was at a local bar with a buddy that evening and went home around midnight. His friend and a few others at the bar confirmed he was there, but no one knew where he went after. He insisted he went home, but since he lived alone, there was no one to back him up. So the cops didn't rule him out as a suspect. Plus, he didn't seem too bothered by his ex-wife's disappearance, which was odd considering they'd been married for years, and she was the mother of his kids. On the night when Elizabeth vanished, a fisherman reported a weird incident. He was fishing on a bridge when he saw a car stop on the bridge, and the driver threw something big, like a person, into the water. It looked like something heavy was tied to this person. But it was dark, and he was far away, so he couldn't see clearly or hear anything because of the wind. Another guy walking his dog near the bridge heard a terrifying scream, saw something big fall from the bridge, and then heard a splash. Based on these accounts, the police decided to search the pond near the bridge. They found a body with a huge chunk of concrete tied to its neck. It was Elizabeth Arellano, the missing woman. If it weren't for the passerby and the fisherman, her body might not have been found at all. Some thought she might have taken her own life due to family issues, but that didn't line up with the witness accounts or her family's statements that she had big plans for her life and wouldn't leave her kids and parents like that. Forensics showed that Elizabeth was still alive when she was thrown off the bridge with the concrete tied to her neck. But who could have done such a horrific thing to a mother? Robbery was ruled out because none of her stuff was missing. Maybe the killer saw her at the club and followed her home, or someone was waiting for her at home. Her ex-husband kept saying he was home sleeping that night and had nothing to do with the murder. The cops weren't quick to rule out Rudolph as a suspect. He didn't have a solid alibi, and his behavior was raising eyebrows. At his ex-wife's funeral, he put on quite a show, crying and saying he wished he could die with her. His sister-in-law even believed him. He also helped set up a charity to fund the funeral. But after the funeral, he seemed like nothing had happened. When the cops checked the CCTV footage, they saw a car like Rudolph's leaving her parents' house around 3 a.m. A neighbor also remembered seeing the car parked nearby. It was also seen driving towards the bridge where she was thrown off. This raised a lot of questions. When the cops checked Rudolph's phone records, they found he'd made several calls that night, first near her workplace, then near her parents' house. He also texted her several times, but she didn't reply. It seemed like he'd been following her and decided to wait for her at her parents' house. With all this evidence, the cops finally arrested Rudolph. One key witness was their eldest son. He recognized the rope found on his mom's neck and a piece of concrete from their backyard. Small fragments of this concrete were also found in Rudolph's car trunk. The cops figured out that Rudolph had waited for his ex-wife at her parents' house, kidnapped her, and forced her into his car. He had already prepared the rope and concrete in his trunk. Then he drove to the bridge and threw her off. Rudolph was arrested 10 days after his ex-wife's body was found. Despite all the evidence against him, he denied any involvement in the crime and insisted he was at home that night. Facing the death penalty, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to get a lighter sentence. In January 2019, he pleaded guilty in court and explained how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom, fainted when she heard his story. Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Even though Rudolph admitted his guilt, he showed no remorse or guilt. He spoke coldly about his crime, didn't apologize, and didn't explain why he did it. The court sentenced him to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family, even though they thought the sentence was too lenient, decided to forgive Rudolph. They didn't want their hearts filled with hate. Now, her parents and sisters are taking care of her kids. That's all for now. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more interesting content. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.